G'day there, welcome to the storyboard. My name is Bo, and we are back in the book of Jude, and we're studying verse 7 today, which is this one here. It's about Sodom and Gomorrah, and we're just going to talk through, I'm going to talk through the things that the things I studied, the things I found interesting, and hopefully you can get a little bit out of this and have a few thoughts yourself. So this is Jude verse 7. Which is up in the left there. It's likewise Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which in the same manner as they indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural lust, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So that's the verse for today. When I was studying this, it was pretty obvious that this is a story from somewhere else. So I had a look up of it, and essentially it is from Genesis 18 and 19. That's where the story comes from, and you can see from a lovely picture that there's something pretty dramatic happening. So what happened is essentially you've got Sodom and Gomorrah, which is our middle city, and our city off to the left there. They were doing some pretty not good stuff as far as God is concerned. Now, most people, if they ever hear of Sodom and Gomorrah, all they think of is sexual sin. That's essentially what their gist was, and why this massive meteorite in the middle here is coming down. But there's more to it than that. So the story goes is that Abraham is chilling out near a tree, and God, with two angels, come and meet with him. And they say, "Oh, we're going to tell Abraham what we're about to do." So they get him off his little lunch break, and they go to a place where they can see both of, particularly just these two, Sodom and Gomorrah. But in actual fact, there are three other cities that are part of this kind of coalition of the cities that are doing all these nasty things. They're called the cities of the plain, which I thought was interesting. So naturally, I drew a curvy thing as opposed to a plane. There are five cities part of this collection called the cities of the plain, and they are Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and this little fellow over here called Zoar. And they say that, we're going to essentially destroy these cities because the sin of them cries up to us into heaven. So kind of like with Cain and Abel, where later on it says, Abel's blood was crying up to God from the ground, and God responds to that. But this is more their sin is coming up to heaven, and they can hear it, and they're here to deal with it. And so they go through this dialogue where Abraham's like, but if you find 50 people that are good, righteous, will you spare the city? And they're like, yes, we will. And Abraham essentially starts to barter and goes down and down and down until he gets to the point where, if there are 10 people there, God, that are righteous, will you spare the city? And God says, yes. And then what happens is he destroys them anyway. So obviously there was not 10 people righteous there. So he calls down, the angels, they get Lot out of the city. Lot's one of these fellas, maybe this fella. No, actually no, Lot needs to be sort of over that direction. They call down fire and brimstone from heaven, which I interpret as a giant meteor, because that's just easy to draw. And they burn up all of these cities, except for this one over here. That one doesn't get burnt up. And so they all get destroyed, and essentially these cities are never rebuilt. And there's a smouldering ruin, and it became a kind of a, how do you put it? If the plagues in Egypt were, I suppose, iconic of God's sort of miraculous deeds, great signs, great wonders, if that's kind of the benchmark of that, or the iconic one, this is it for judgment. This is always the thing that everyone remembers back as the quintessential judgment. This is the one thing that everyone remembers. So that became the basic idea of judgment for all the people since that time when they're looking back and they're like, oh, these people are the example, that they sin to this degree, they're wicked, and this is what happens. This is God's benchmark. This is the example that he's setting here. And I found, when I was studying, all these references to their sin in all of these places, in Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Jeremiah, that's 3rd Maccabees, which is a apocryphal book, which is not part of the Bible, but it's a reference from outside the Bible that sort of shows that most Jewish people, they're familiar with this story. 2nd Esdras and a few in New Testament, but I couldn't be bothered writing them all down. And they actually list their sin as more than just sexual sin. Why? I mean, the question I was asking is, why would God blow up all these people if they were just being, a little bit, what's the word? Lewd, like, sexually immoral. And they're accused by all these people of essentially all this other stuff. Obviously, the one everyone remembers is homosexuality, arrogance, neglect of wisdom, lack of hospitality, gluttony, my favourite word, lewdness. They multiplied and enlarged every possible pleasure. That's Philo talking. He's a historian, ancient historian. That was his conception of these people in Sodom and Gomorrah. That was what they were trying to do. That was their mission statement. Impiety and insolence, and that was Josephus's opinion. He's also a famous historian, which most people who are Bible scholars, they will reference Josephus because he's like this famous historian guy. And I've got another list here, and this lists the judgment. So when I say that this is used as an example of judgment, this is what I'm talking about. This is all the times that people say something along the lines of, oh, and the sins of Jerusalem are so big that it would be harsher than Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, they all use this as an example. Literally, God, you put it here as an example, and all these writers have used it as an example as, oh no, the Philistines, they're going to be smote just as the Sodom and Gomorrahites were. So that's that. And what was I going to go on to next? Eternal fire. That's right. Eternal fire, which was very curious for me. I found it interesting. Was eternal fire. There it is. Was this in reference to hell, essentially? And it turns out probably not really. When it says eternal fire, I realised that it was just because this big meteor thing, it blew up all of these cities, and they were never rebuilt. They were essentially, I think it was Josephus again who was describing them as they were a smouldering ruin, like years, centuries later. All you could see there was just kind of like the effect of, when a fire's just smouldering. It was just like that permanently. So it wasn't so much a spiritual comment that these people are now burning in hell. It was more they saw that it was eternally burning. The other question I had was this one about pursuing unnatural lust. And because I always thought that it was just homosexuality was their sin as well. But it's a very interesting tie-in to the last verse, because in the story, one of their, I suppose, the sins that they were actually documented is they tried to get to the angels that were trying to save Lot and his family. They wanted to essentially, they were saying, bring them out that we may know them, which of course we all know means bring them out so that we can have sex with them, essentially. And Jude here is actually conscious of this, and the translation that I like better is not so much and pursued unnatural lust, but they went after strange flesh. That's in the New King James. And that's sort of communicating that they went after flesh, sort of bodies. They went after people who weren't of their own kind. They were angels. They were pursuing this unnatural thing. And the scholar that I was reading before, he really liked this because, not the scene, he didn't like the scene, he liked the tie-in with the previous verse because these sodomites, they were transcending God's created order. They weren't going after human winning. They were going after these angelic people. They're going against creation, and that ties in well with the previous verse where you've got angels going after human women. So it's kind of like you've got these guys are going this way, and those fellas are going that way. Like they're crossing over, and he thought it was put in here very, very deliberately to show that these teachers that are coming in to the church, they're much like these people. They're transcending the created order by corrupting the gospel into a license to just do any sexual thing that they wanted. And so not only that, but also this is the judgment that they're looking for, that they can look forward to. Essentially, giant meteors coming down and blowing up people with great smitingness. Whew. Wow, that was a lot for Jude verses 7, and I learned a lot. It was good fun, and hopefully we're going to be back soon with some more in Jude verses 8, which is hopefully going to tie together all these 3 verses that we've just done. So please come back to the channel later. Please remember to leave comments, and I hope you enjoyed Jude verses 7, and we'll be back with Jude verses 8 pretty soon. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheerio.